What's going on, everyone? I think we all feel fairly confident about the top 12 wide receivers in Fantasyland ahead of 2025. But after that, we got some olds, we got some youngs who haven't quite lived up to expectations. We have some muddled depth charts. We have some passing games that just flat out suck. So what better time than now to try to go through all this and figure out where the gems are hidden. So joining me today, Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. And Dwain, let's get right into it with a pair of wide receivers who have scored all sorts of fantasy points over the years. That said, Father Time is indeed undefeated. So with Mike Evans and Davante Adams, again, coming off seasons where they still posted top 10 numbers, are you buying them at their respective, round 3 ADP?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with them at ADP, but I'm really interested in talking through these two players because I will say, I'd struggled, exactly where to put them in the ranks. I honestly struggled with which one to rank ahead of the other. I had a slight lean to Davante Adams. I have at wide receiver 16, Mike Evans at wide receiver 17. So when I started digging into Evans, one thing that popped up for me, number one, he was really good last year. He's going to be 32 this year. And based on the research that I've done, historically speaking, wide receivers reaching age 32, typically it's 63% of their prime production being the best 3 years of their career. Of course, Mike Evans has been one of the best wide receivers we've seen in the NFL in the last 15 years. So his prime peak is actually really good. So 63% doesn't necessarily mean it'll be bad. And there's the other part of it, Ian, is last year he scored 17.2 fantasy points per game. Davante Adams was at 17.1. They're really close. But man, Mike Evans, did you know that last year he had a career high yards per route run? 2.41. So yeah, and in his 2 years with Baker, he's at a 2.37. ESPN Open Score, which we know doesn't correlate super strongly to future fantasy points, but it's a pretty sticky metric itself year over year. It's better than yards per route run. A 91, his previous 3 seasons, 68. But you know what happened last year? His average depth of target was a career low of 12.7. So they were actually just using him in a very different way. If you look at him historically, especially the time while Tom Brady was there, he was more just running that vertical route tree, and they really opened things up for him. And so my first thought was, that probably happened after Chris Godwin left. No, that was actually going on in the early weeks. Now, early on, when he had more target competition from Chris Godwin, it wasn't as great, 19% target share. But I went back and looked at the last 2 years with Baker when both of those guys are on the field. Ian, 28% target share to Evans, 27% to Godwin. So, I know it. He's going to be 32, but playing, the best he's played in his career. Baker Mayfield has had these great numbers with him 2 years in a row. I think the big question is, what does Emeka Egbuka do to this offense? Because we do know that whenever these teams run 3 wide receivers instead of Cade Otton being your next, option, or a running back being your next option, the historical data has shown the yards per route run, target shares, all those things are better whenever you're really playing primarily in a 2 wide receiver set. And so I think the one thing, obviously he's getting older, a cliff can happen at any moment, but it's what do they do with Emeka Egbuka? And if they play him, in a full-time role, they're 85% in 3 wide receivers, which if I drafted Emeka Egbuka in round 1, that's probably what I would be doing if I was an offensive coordinator. That to me feels like the biggest question, right? We got Liam Cohen gone. Josh Grizzard comes over. He was the 2024 pass coordinator already for the team. So I'm with you. I don't think he's going to change much. And before that, he was with Mike McDaniels as the quality control on the offense. So another good offensive mind. So I think it does come down to what we think about Egbuka. And so really interesting. I know we still need to break down Adams, but just starting here with Mike Evans, where your head is at on him.
Hasn't finished worse than wide receiver 16 in fantasy since all the way back in 2017. So, you mentioned it. We've actually seen more fantasy points per game with Baker under center for Evans than we did with Tom Brady himself. So, had Antonio Brown there, Brady obviously distributing it and winning plenty of football games. I'm not trying to shout down the GOAT or anything like that. But again, it's almost like our conversations, with Derrick Henry during our running back episodes, Dwayne, where it's just if Father Time or the injuries don't just completely debilitate Evans, I have a hard time seeing how he's exactly going to bust. And when you do look at that open score, as you mentioned, the yards per route run, he's trending upwards, okay? Now, I refuse to believe that Evans at age 32 is better than he was at 28, but hey, man, maybe it is going to be in the year 2025 with athletes taking better care of themselves than ever, with being, a less violent form of football. Maybe we do start seeing players, ball out a bit more into their 30s than we're used to. So 32, again, is a pretty rare territory in terms of seeing players perform at a high level. But again, we're kind of getting the discount already when you see Evans being priced as that wide receiver 18. It's not like we have to buy him as that wide receiver 1 he's been. So I almost feel like the cost is fine. So all that said, I haven't consistently found myself just, every time I'm in round 3, like, oh, give me more Mike Evans here. But also, man, not someone I'm necessarily shying away from.
Yeah, and I think, again, I do think that Egbuka is the key. Like, if Egbuka's good and they use him in 3 wide receiver sets, you brought up another really good point when you talked about Tom Brady. They had Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski also there with Evans, right? So it's whenever you suddenly have to split the pie 3 ways, that changes the equation. So I'm with you. I think there's enough red flags that we can't rank him in the top 12, right? Because a cliff year can hit at any time, even if you've been playing great up to this point in your career. Like we just talked about, hit some career high numbers in different categories last year that really make him look more like a wide receiver 1. But I do think that the market's already priced all this in. So when I ultimately looked at where ADP was, I was like, I want to put him in a range where people can draft Mike Evans. I'm not making him a fade. I'm not making him a full-on buy. I do think the path where he ultimately disappoints is this. If Emeka Egbuka does come out and get like a 19, 20% target share and Chris Godwin is healthy, then obviously there's not a way for Mike Evans to do what he did last year, which was down the stretch, man. Over the end of the year, once Godwin was out, he had a 30% target share. Like, that's not happening.
You mentioned a little bit difference in average target depth for Evans, so I hear you. But don't you think Egbuka is a much bigger threat to Chris Godwin in terms of how they're likely to be used? Because, again, I know we've talked about Egbuka plenty in the pre-draft process. Like, I don't think he's someone that needs to be in the slot, but I don't necessarily think about that about, Chris Godwin either. So for me, that's going to be the 2 guys kind of rotating between that Z and the slot, probably overlapping a bit more with the screen stuff. I mean, again, first round, 19th overall pick, Emeka Egbuka, your wide receiver 3 in the rookie supermodel over on fantasylife.com. Like the player, of course, but I'd almost be more worried about Godwin's floor, having an issue there.
I think it could be a bigger impact to Godwin, to your point, but still, anytime you divide the pie up more ways, and if Egbuka's talented, there's just going to be more times where it's like, hey, the first read's going to be Egbuka, right? And, oh, man, I may get off of my first read, which is Evans, quicker because I know I can get to Egbuka, and it may be based on like coverage and a route combination, whereas before you're like, oh, my third guy was Sterling Shepard. I'll just throw it to Mike Evans anyway. Versus, well, I better go ahead and at least check Egbuka. Like, he might actually be open. Maybe he's got some space. So I think it hurts all of them besides Baker. Obviously, this is a killer for Cade Otton. I know we're not talking tight ends. Man, Egbuka's arrival is a real killer for Cade Otton. So I think having said all that, like, let's talk about Adams and see where you are. I think that Evans, you got to worry about the age. You got to worry about Egbuka. But again, I think the market's already priced it all in. And when we say that, guys, what we mean is right now, Ian already mentioned it, you can get Mike Evans in round 3 of your fantasy drafts. So he is a guy going outside the top 12 wide receivers. And so it's like the market's already basically saying, okay, he's old. There's some risk. We've got another mouth to feed. But with Adams, we don't have the issue of a third mouth to feed, like, because we've got Tutu Atwell. You got Terrence Ferguson, who they drafted. It's really, you've got a monster wide receiver 1, though, because Puka Nacua is a bigger obstacle than Chris Godwin, right? Let's just be honest. Puka Nacua is a guy that, he can go on these runs where he's posting these 35, 40% target shares. But Davante Adams, he'll be 32.7, so almost 33 when the year starts. I've got him 1 spot ahead. I've got him wide receiver 16. I see these passing games really similarly. I've got the Bucks in my projections ranked as the 6th best passing offense, 7th, and I've got the Rams at the 8th. So it's essentially a tie. I've got a couple more touchdown passes to Baker than what I do Matthew Stafford. So I see similar, scoring environment, similar quarterback play. I mean, obviously we like Baker. He's still more in the prime of his career than Stafford. You've got one less target to deal with, but the wide receiver 1 is Puka Nacua, a superstar, right? Which is something that Mike Evans doesn't have to deal with. But we've also seen over these last couple of years, we talked about it yesterday on the show with Puka Nacua, this is a team that's been very willing to just dice things up between 2 guys. We saw it with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. I think we're going to get a very similar situation here with Davante Adams. I will say this, though. A career low average depth of target for him as well last year, which is not a big deal. Like, the Rams are probably going to use him that way anyway. Like, that the Rams don't have all these super deep ADOT players that they're using. 2.04 yards per route run. Like, he's definitely not at his prime. But if you look at his last 2 years, Ian, he's at a 2, so that's still good. Like, in the 3 years before that, when Davante Adams was absolutely humming, 2.74 yards per route run, but 26% targets per route run last year. That's his 3rd lowest season of his career, but still had a 28% over the last 2 years. So kind of really like a similar story, right? This guy that has these underlying wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 traits, but going to be almost 33 when the year starts, and he's got to deal with Puka. But again, I slightly lean to him just because I felt like Ibuka added like that third potential risk, right, for Evans, where I wasn't getting that with Davante Adams. But where did you land on these two?
I actually have Adams wide receiver 14. I got Evans a little bit lower there at wide receiver 18. And really, it's just investing not only in Adams, who has been incredible, obviously, during the large portion of his NFL career, even last year, guys. I mean, only Jamar Chase and Brian Thomas Jr. actually had more PPR points than Adams during the final 6 weeks of the season. But it's just a Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford passing game, all right? Puka, Cooper Kupp, they've had some great receivers. I get it. But, Dwayne, you see what happens even when Puka and Kupp were out of the picture. We had Jordan Whittington. We had Tutu Atwell. We had, Jags, for lack of a better word, still putting up big time numbers. And overall, since again, McVay and Stafford have joined forces, Rams wide receivers are second in both receptions and receiving yards just as a whole across the league. So for me, again, I have not seen that fall off with Adams. His open score, just like Evans, remains very well. And just from watching him last year, I mean, the release package, the yards after the catch ability, watch that Jaguars game, watch that Texans game, still very much looks like one of the best wide receivers in the league. So for me, again, if I am going to be investing in an offense, the number 2 wide receiver, presumably, I want it to be in a high octane passing attack like the Bengals, and in this case, like the Rams. So I guess this is kind of our way of saying, again, not overly worried about father time for these two players for the time being. Famous last words, perhaps, but
if you have to put odds on it, though, Ian, like chances are one of these guys falls off this year. Like, I mean, it's a decent chance. Now, again, Evans is actually playing really good. Like, Adams is playing okay compared to like the best years of his career. So maybe we lean towards the drop off being more.
Is that just because Adams? But Adams' peak was always better than Evans. I mean, it just was.
Yeah, his peak was better. Yeah, absolutely, but not by a huge margin. So, I mean, look, you could slice it a lot of different ways. The problem with Father Time is we don't always get warning signals. Like, like when the cliff here hits, it just hits, and you're just kind of like, whoa, that was awesome. I mean, he was really good the year before, and now he's not good. And so it's one of these things where I know we try to quantify it. And I think we use reasonable things to try to quantify it, but like there's a decent chance one of these dudes ends up being a bust, even though they are priced down. So I think the ultimate thing we care about in fantasy is they are priced down. I think the market's taking things into account. It's not like you got to spend a second round on either one of them. So I think it's okay. But like if we're like week 6, I think there's a good chance that we're like, man, what happened to, I don't know, you insert name, Davante Adams or Mike Evans. I could see it happening.
I hear you, and that is a concern. But as we get into our next question, it kind of, once you see the wide receivers are going alongside, I think that's where you can start wrapping your mind around it. Because again, Tampa Bay, Rams, these are two offenses that in terms of implied points for next year, Vegas does believe will be a top 10 scoring unit. Meanwhile, here are some of the wide receivers going ahead of these guys from wide receiver 13 to wide receiver 18. Garrett Wilson, we'll see how the Justin Fields experience goes throwing the football. Marvin Harrison Jr. couldn't even rip off a top 36 finish last season despite being the number 1 option there. Rashee Rice, we'll see how the injury return goes, how the suspension could go. We'll talk about him a little bit later. Terry McLaurin also getting up there. Tyreek Hill just had a far worse season than Adams or Evans. He's priced ahead of him. And then Jackson Smith and the Jigba obviously has a new quarterback, and also Cooper Kupp. So again, I get it. It's easy to be like, I'm fading those old guys. I'm done with it. We've seen the data. But when you, again, start really stacking them up against who is also going in that range, that's why, again, I do think it begs the question, and accordingly why I am willing to at least get some exposure there. But one of the focus on 3 of those Buckeyes I just named, Dwayne. It's time for everyone's favorite game again. Mary, start, and cut. Garrett Wilson, Terry McLaurin, and Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm just going to quickly list them and throw it to you. But personally, man, I would be marrying Garrett Wilson. I just think the target ceiling is out of control. And just the company that, again, we have seen players who record 1,000 yards in each of their top 3 seasons. Very, very good. I do think we could finally get that breakout, lest we forget Justin Fields did that for DJ Moore all the way back in 2023. Terry McLaurin would be my start here. I still just think investing in Jaden Daniels and that Commanders offense is a tiebreaker. And for me, would be cutting Marvin Harrison Jr. I would love to see them use him a bit differently, not run, the highest percentage of go routes of any, wide receiver with X amount of targets last year. But Drew Petzing is back. Kyler Murray is back. And again, just have a hard time with Marv, who, Dwayne, I watched every single Marv reception last week. He broke one tackle all year. PFF gave him one, and honestly, it was kind of iffy. It was more like a bad angle than anything, all right? So I just think at this point in time in the year 2025, Garrett and Terry are better wide receivers than Marvin Harrison Jr. Maybe that changes, but for now, I would be cutting him. What say you?
Yeah, so I would start Garrett Wilson. Well, actually, I guess I got to go in order. So I'm going to marry Marvin Harrison Jr. So we're opposite. Whoa. I'm going to start Garrett Wilson, and then I'm going to cut Terry McLaurin. And this is really hard. Like I've got Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver 18. I've got Marvin Harrison as my wide receiver 19 guys. Terry McLaurin's my wide receiver 20. So it's not like Ian comes up with these freaking ridiculous scenarios and you guys can blame him. These guys are all so close together. So what we're actually saying is like, these guys are really close. Like it wouldn't surprise us if any one of them was actually the leader of the three, but Ian is literally making me marry one, start one, and cut one. And so just real quick, like on Marvin Harrison, like there are definitely concerns. I've watched the film on him. I've looked at the data. I'll say this. His target share is borderline wide receiver 2 worthy. And as a rookie, historically, that's not bad because we expect players to get better from their rookie season. If you look at his yards per route run, though, it was wide receiver 4 worthy, right? So that is a little bit of a worry. And again, though, a rookie season. And it's also Terry McLaurin and Garrett Wilson are two guys that have also never gone bonkers in yards per route run, right? That's actually been an area where you could argue, man, they kind of underperform compared to other parts of their, profile when we talk about talent. PFF receiving grade overall, which is really interesting, Ian, because he did only have the one broken tackle, which accounts for what the wide receivers do after they catch the ball, was a 77.2, which is wide receiver 2 worthy for Marvin Harrison Jr. So we've got like these wide receiver 2 mostly traits that are showing up. So when I look at it and the fact that he was only a rookie last year and then how well he did in the Supermodel the year before, one of the top 3 scorers all time, I'm just going to lean into it and I'm going to really make a bet on Marvin Harrison Jr. getting better. You know me, I'm a sucker for upside. I do believe upside wins fantasy championships. And I think that of the 3, like I'm going to go with Marv as the prospect.
Why is Garrett ranked higher for you then? Why do you have Garrett ranked higher?
Yeah, because I want to start him. I didn't say, I rank the guys that I want to marry one spot below the guys I want to start. Don't argue with my logic. What's wrong with you? No, I probably do need to change it. And so thank you for calling me out in front of like our national audience of 7 people. I appreciate that.
Love you guys.
So yeah, we love you guys. So when I look at Marv, like he's the guy I'm going to marry. I'm just going to bet on the upside. So Garrett Wilson, like all of his underlying talent data is still good. Like target share is wide receiver 1 worthy. Yards per route run, borderline wide receiver 3, but PFF receiving grade, wide receiver 2 worthy. So he's kind of got a mix of these things. But the problem is we've seen him for 3 years. Also got to see him with Aaron Rodgers. And I know Aaron Rodgers isn't what he used to be, Ian, but I just hope for more. Like his yards per route run, 1.70 over the last 3 years, 1.69 with Rodgers. Now I know he did have to compete with Davante Adams. It's basically like Aaron Rodgers' old roommate. It's like every time Aaron Rodgers goes to get a new job, like his old roommates get jobs with him. So I get that's going on as well. But then when you layer in Justin Fields, and I know what he did with DJ Moore, and you're going to bring that up, but still, it's not ideal. I think we have to say that overall, we would say it's a negative. Could it work out the way it did for DJ Moore? Sure, it could. But overall, I would just rather him have a passer that has shown a better ceiling than what we've seen from Justin Fields. So I get it. Kyler not exactly lighting the world on fire, but Kyler's 225 yards per game feels pretty good when you start looking at Justin Fields being potentially in a range of like 175 to 185. So I think that's a challenge. The Jets I've got projected as one of the bottom 3 passing offenses in the league. And so like the Cardinals, I don't have them high, but I definitely don't have them as outlier bad. So Garrett, though, I'm still betting on the talent. He's 25 years old. Terry McLaurin, you could argue, like, I'm an idiot that he's in the best situation. He's at age 30. And so, like, why would he not be my start? But again, like his underlying data points, honestly, were the same last year as they've been for his career. The only difference. And so here's the deal. If Jaden Daniels was really like improving Terry McLaurin, I would expect all of these other underlying data points to improve, but they didn't. His target share basically stayed where it was, which is a borderline wide receiver 2. His yards per route run basically stayed where they've been. Like it was a 1.98, a slight improvement over his 1.86 over the last 3 years, but still wide receiver 3, borderline wide receiver 2 worthy. PFF receiving grade was wide receiver 2 range. So really a guy that just did well in touchdowns. Like he just got the touchdowns went nuts for him. Now you could also argue, yeah, Dwayne, because he played with Jaden Daniels, he didn't have to play with like a sucky quarterback for one time in his life, and he actually did score these touchdowns. He can be a deep threat. He's a guy that can score from anywhere on the field, and I wouldn't have a lot to argue with you about on that. Again, this was a ridiculous question because these guys are all three so close together, but I am going to lean into the youth of Marvin Harrison Jr. Then I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson. Then I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin. The one other thing I'll say with Terry, they did add Deebo Samuel. Everyone assumes Deebo Samuel is washed. I think there's a good chance that's wrong. I really do. I think there's a good chance that's wrong. Deebo was playing with pneumonia last year. Deebo's not in that phase of his career where I think we should be projecting for sure that there's a fall off. Could it happen? Yes, it could. Here's the other thing. Deebo Samuel could be a lesser version than what we were used to 2 or 3 years ago. I think there's a really good chance of that. But that could still leave him as being better than anything else that Washington had last year as the wide receiver too. And Terry did benefit. We saw it, Ian, of getting a lot of these looks around the line of scrimmage last year. And I think a lot of those freebies could now go to Deebo Samuel. And so I see a like real potential cool marriage between the RPO stuff with Jaden Daniels, handoff to Brian Robinson Jr. or Austin Eckler, or I throw it out in the flat to Deebo Samuel because we've got this underneath zone coverage. So I know I said a lot of words there, but like I actually did do the research on these guys because when you put them there and I saw where they were in the ranks, I was like, okay, I'm actually going to have to work my way through all of this. And yes, so I did end up with Mary Marv, start Garrett Wilson, cut Terry McLaurin.
I was disappointed and honestly just a little bit surprised to see Terry only had 117 targets in 17 games last year, considering that target competition. And again, that is a situation where as much as I do think Garrett could have this sky-high target ceiling, can't always assume that even if, again, the rest of that wide receiver depth chart is pretty freaking abysmal out here. So, hey, at least the Jets, they still got Allen Lazard. Dwayne, he's staying. He's sound the Wolf of Wall Street gift. Like, don't worry, Jets fans. You guys still got Allen Lazard. But let's talk about, again, an offense that certainly, fans are feeling a bit better about, and that is the Patrick Mahomes-led Chiefs, albeit certainly weren't their, usual explosive selves last year, and honestly for the better part of the last 24 months. So now we went into last year hoping it was going to be Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Hollywood Brown. Wound up really never even getting that trio of starting wide receivers out there at once. Should be the case in 2025, though, because Rashee Rice looking very good returning from injury. We actually had Dr. Deepak Chona, at Sports MD Analytics, great follow on Twitter, saying that Rice is likely playing in week 1. Data actually predicts a faster bounce back than a traditional ACL injury. And guys, don't tell your friends because you want to draft him early, but based on what Drew Davenport is telling us in the legal process that, let's face it, does not move very fast in this country, it doesn't seem overly likely that Rice is going to be suspended. And personally, I'm drafting him like he is going to be eligible for all 17 games at least this season. So Dwayne, again, Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy going in a pretty similar spot in drafts. If you want to take them both at the turn, fantastic. But if you only had one shot, which one would you take that opportunity on?
I'm going with Rashee Rice, man. I could be wrong on that, but Xavier Worthy, the way he ultimately ended up breaking out at the end of last year was taking on the Rashee Rice role. Now, maybe they split those two things up between them, which would be bad for Rashee Rice. But the time that we've seen Rashee Rice, whenever he's been a full-time wide receiver, Ian, it's been nothing but good news for us. If we go back to last year and we look at those first 3 games, we're talking about a guy that was averaging 21.6 fantasy points per game. He had an 8.5 utilization score. He had a 34% freaking target share over the first 3 years. So I get it, guys. Some of the stuff is gimmicky, and I know, even Matt Harmon has come to me, like when I tweet about it, he's like, come on, man, like just let me have my fun, talking about that Rashee Rice really isn't that great of a wide receiver. And like when you turn on the film, like I get the things that Matt's talking about. But at the end of the day, he's playing for Andy Reid and he's playing with Patrick Mahomes, and they pepper this dude with targets, and it's almost like he's just their little cheat code. I don't think they're too worried about how good of a route runner Rashee Rice is, and he's really good after the catch with the ball in his hand. So it comes down to like the injury. I'm feeling like you really good about like as far as like the legal scenario based on everything Drew's looked at. Really does feel like it's going to be more of a 2026 thing. So he is the guy that I have been drafting the most out of these players. But you mentioned it the other day, just because we like one player over another on a team doesn't mean that we don't draft the other. So I will say this, I've been drafting a ton of Rashee Rice, but when I don't get him, those are the drafts where I will circle around and get Xavier Worthy, because I definitely want some experience to Xavier Worthy. We just can't discount what he did at the end of last year completely, even though we think that Rashee Rice will take over part of that workload. I mean, but if we look at this guy, Ian, basically from what was it, week 15 or so, when he took over that real full-time route, his target share is 31%, 27%, 22%. He was hurt in week 18, only played 4% of the passing plays. But then we get to week 20 in the playoffs, 26%. Week 21 in the playoffs, 28%, and then the championship game, 26%, or sorry, Super Bowl, 26%. So when they needed a player to step up the most, they did go to Xavier Worthy. So I do think there's a chance that it could be Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, and they could be closer than we think. I think the big question is, like, for that to happen, doesn't one of these guys have to develop into being more than, like, I don't want to call them complete gimmick players, but the players getting the freebies? I do think Xavier Worthy is the one of the two that would be more likely to develop that next level to his game, because he does have the speed. And we actually did see him in college win at the deep level of the field. He wasn't just attached to the line of scrimmage. So interested in what your thoughts are there. Definitely drafting more Rashee Rice, but I'm not out on Xavier Worthy.
I'm Rice over Worthy, but we did start to see Worthy come into his own down the stretch, especially in that Super Bowl where he caught 2 targets that were thrown at least 30 yards downfield. Obviously, that long touchdown was more like 50 after going, 1 for 10 in the regular season, having all those battles with the sideline. So I know the Eagles were freaking already up 34 points by the time
you're going to have to mention garbage time here, Ian.
I get it, but dude, it's not like those cornerbacks are out there like, oh yeah, Worthy, we don't care. I'm already drinking champagne on the 50-yard line or anything like that. So regardless, again, even remove the Super Bowl from the equation, we did see a nice jump up. And yes, it did come on a lower average target depth. Okay, weeks 1 through 10 last year, he was at almost 12 yards. Weeks 11 through the Super Bowl, just 7.5. So it was a role change of sorts, but also, man, didn't exactly love what we saw from Travis Kelce last year, and he really has been the guy getting the bulk of those targets and pass additions of this offense. So who's to say that a reduced role for Kelce couldn't actually lead to more Worthy and Rice on the perimeter, getting those shorter, design, gadgety, whatever you want to call them, targets, the sort of things that Mahomes, unfortunately, for our viewing pleasure, throws more than anyone else. Patrick Mahomes has the lowest average target depth in the NFL over these past 2 seasons. And guess what? It won him a Super Bowl in 2023, and he was a bad 60 minutes away from getting his 3rd straight last year. So again, the Chiefs offense has turned from one of just the most explosive, highlight-filled units we've seen in recent memory, from 2018 to 2022. Now, still effective, but more of that death by 1,000 paper cuts version. And if these are going to be the 2 guys running it, man, who's to say the answer can't just be both? So Worthy, Rice, feeling good. What about Hollywood Brown, Dwain, who I believe this is getting released on a Wednesday? Happy birthday. Only 28. If you would have told me 31, I would have been like, yeah, makes sense. But Hollywood Brown, maybe healthy for a change?
Yeah, I mean, look, he didn't ever fully evolve into a full-time playing role last year, but it did get better, right? He went from a 33% route participation to 49, and then in the playoffs, 72, 74, and 74. Guys, remember, they still had DeAndre Hopkins there at the time, so he was still getting a little bit of work. They've got Juju Smith-Schuster. But if you look at Hollywood Brown, like, he is the other guy on the team. Like, if it were to come together for him, that could work on the outside as a full-time player and threaten that deep part of the field, right? And the intermediate part of the field. And then you're letting, some of the other guys like Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy work some of the more of the underneath stuff. Obviously, Kelce working in that intermediate range of the field too. So I don't think it's a given. But I'll be honest, like, I have a hard time thinking that Hollywood Brown's not going to have an 80, 85% route participation, looking at the way this roster is made up, assuming that he's healthy. And when you get that on the Chiefs, especially if you're thinking about best ball where you don't have to pick the weeks that it's going to happen, I think that Hollywood Brown really can have value. And he's going much later in drafts than where he was going last year. Like, I struggle to see a situation where Hollywood Brown isn't on the field like at least 85% of the plays. And if he's doing that for the Chiefs, I feel like we should be drafting him more. Like, I'm not saying you want to steam Hollywood Brown up draft boards. I think the other side of the coin to him is we've seen him play in some really good offenses over the years as really the main guy. And he never has been able to really step beyond being like more of a wide receiver 3 when we look at the underlying data points, right? The yards per route run, the PFF receiving grade, open score, all these different things we try to piece together to give you guys the whole picture. Hollywood Brown is never, like, he's had little stretches of looking like a wide receiver 1, but whenever you put together like seasons and you look at multiple seasons together, really looks more like a wide receiver 3. So we probably have to call it what it is. But man, if he can step back to being a wide receiver 3 level talent on the Chiefs and he's running routes 85% of the time. I mean, last year, here's the thing I'll say, even though the routes weren't great at the end of the year, Ian, he had a 25% targets per route run over his last 5 games played. Like, nice. So he was actually doing well on a targets per route run basis. Do we think he's going to do that on a full playing time, with everybody healthy? No. But man, could Hollywood Brown have a 19% target share in an offense like the Chiefs that suddenly bounces back to being a top 3 in the league? If that happens, like, people are going to be pretty happy with him in fantasy.
And you had to buy him as a wide receiver 3 last year. Right now, he's going wide receiver 62. I mean, here are the guys going right after Hollywood Brown right now in early drafts. Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer, Jalen McMillan, Xavier Legette, Cedric Tillman, Romeo Doubs, Jalen Noel, Adam Thielen. Not saying some of them can't work out, but again, at that price tag, guys, I do think it is worthy of a late round dart. And man, again, the injuries are numerous and just every single freaking year, man. 2019, it was an ankle sprain. Then we had a Liz Frank and knee patella sprain in 2020. Hamstring and ankle issues in 2021, more hamstring and foot fracture problem in 2022. A heel really, messed up his 2023. And last year, what do you have, Dwain?
Yeah, I don't
Come on,
remember.
You memorized this.
I can't say
I thought you had the SC
groin.
Joint, something crazy. No, not the groin.
Yeah, it's the sternoclavicular.
Thank you.
Yeah,
the sternoclaviculitis, whatever.
Sternoclavicular. I thought you were trying to. I was like, oh my god, did he have a late season groin injury? Because Ian just wants me to say groin.
I remember you actually you nailed that diagnosis. So again, the fact he's not coming off these repeated ACL injuries or something that we could, seemingly see impact him and just sap the athleticism does give me a bit more, again, confidence that he can at least beat this wide receiver 6 price tag right now. So really, the Chiefs wide receivers, I think what we got through, yes, we are going to be buying all of them at cost, at least for the time being. So plenty more wide receivers that maybe we don't feel quite as good about, but hey, you know what, Dwayne? Sometimes I feel a lot better about fantasy football and even life in general after a few nice cold Bud Lights.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done.
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, Ian, you saw the binoculars. It is time for that Bud Light breakout watch. And, producer Swing, he's in control. He's controlling the strings. So, of course, who does he point us to? It's going to be the Bears. It's going to be the Bears. Actually, I know you wrote this part up, Ian. And so when we talk about Caleb Williams, we talk about this entire show. These are all guys we're excited about. And I think we've all acknowledged that the Bears are like this very boom bust proposition. But if we are talking about we are got the bear up. We are talking about this potential, if we're going to be bullish on the Bears, and we've got to pick one of these wide receivers, right, that we think is going to be the one to break out. Is there one that you're putting your chip on most often in this attack?
Man, just based on where I'm buying them, it's been Ramadunze more times than not. And I haven't gone out of my way for him, Dwayne. It's not like I came into this offseason ranking him as this wide receiver 25. He was honestly kind of going around there before the draft, and I balked at it. I thought it was way too high. But we keep on doing these, mock drafts with the whole Fantasy Life team. And when I'm in round 8, round 9, and I'm seeing the opportunity to still get a guy who was, again, picked inside the top 10 one short season ago in an offense we fully expected to take, big steps forward. Yeah, I'm buying me some Roma Dunze, man. Just, again, I don't want to be too much of a victim of vibes, but at the same time, I do think, as you've talked about, it is an emotional game. We do have to pay some sort of attention to the reality that the DJ Moore situation did not go great last year. We had him looking like seemingly quitting on some plays. We also have insiders from Chicago talking about basically DJ coming off the sideline and just ridiculing Caleb Williams in front of other teammates. And again, just some of the comments from Ben Johnson about everyone having to earn their spot and be accountable. I just don't love everything going on with DJ Moore, who, let's face it, doesn't not as provocative as saying he's a Jameis merchant, but at this point, man, DJ Moore has been a Justin Fields merchant. All right, we have not seen this guy produce that same level of production with the sad sack of other quarterbacks he's been with. So for me, again, in a new offense that seemingly Ben Johnson is going to be getting the ball to his best playmakers, Colson Loveland now in the fold, Luther Burden now in the fold. Again, not saying DJ Moore is completely washed in anything, but at that price tag, I think the chance of Rome emerging as the one in this offense is, 40-60 in favor of DJ Moore. And right now I'll take that discount in ADP.
A Justin Fields merchant. Like, we should mark that. Like, I don't know that those terms will ever be used again. Maybe they will for Garrett Wilson. I know we're trying to be optimistic about Garrett Wilson this year. And here's the thing is, I threw DJ Moore out of this because we're talking about a breakout. DJ Moore already had his breakout. So I think really we're talking about Rome Odunze, Luther Burden here. And if we wanted to talk tight ends, Colson Loveland, obviously I think is kind of in the mix here. We're just talking about the pass catchers. The challenge, and we've talked about it, is even if this offense goes well, right, and it booms in the biggest way possible, if all of these guys being good would help that happen, we've got target competition of this stuff really getting spread around. But if I was having to pick based on where they're going right now in drafts, Luther Burden's the one I have been drafting more of. Now, I think Rome Odunze was obviously the better prospect, Ian. I think that Rome Odunze is much more locked into a role because here's the thing. I don't think anyone else on the team can come out there and run all the different routes that Rome Odunze can run. Like, he is the guy that can stretch the vertical element. He can give you the play underneath. We didn't see it as much last year. They more gave those plays to some of the other guys. But I do think that he has the skill set to attack all three levels. So I feel like his playing time is the most locked in, but it's also represented by ADP, right? You mentioned where you have to take him, whereas with Luther Burden, this is a guy that falls into round 9 or 10 right now in best ball drafts. He's going to go later than that, right, guys? When we start talking about redraft home leagues, Luther Burden's going to fall further than that. I was actually checking him out over on the site, in our draft champion. It was more like round 12 or 13. And when I get to do those, I'm always excited because I've been doing the underdog and DraftKings drafts, and now all of a sudden, you get to take him like 4 rounds later than that, and it's really nice. So Burden is this guy, like, I could really see them like scheming some things up for him, and it's just the lower price tag. But having said all that, I do think Rome Odunze is more locked into a role. So if I was saying which one do I feel the best about overall, I still think it's Rome, but he's still pretty expensive. Now, here's the thing. I went back and I looked at the comps for a guy like Rome, Ian, guy going in the top 8 picks of the draft, so really high draft capital, really came out, and there's no real better way to put it. He bombed. Rome Odunze bombed in a lot of ways in his year one. Now, his total yardage output and some of those things weren't terrible, which I did try to take into an account. But the list, right, of the comps, they're really bad. But there is one really good name on there. So if you're trying to hang your hat on something, just remember Davante Adams. Davante Adams wasn't an early first-round pick, but I did expand it to include second-rounders because how these samples, sometimes when you narrow them, it's like, oh, I got 3 names to look at. You have to expand them out a little bit. Davante Adams is a guy that actually looked a lot like Rome Odunze early in his career, and he still eventually – he looked bad, but he did eventually have this big, huge breakout. So it's one of those never say never kind of scenarios. So – at ADP, I'm taking Luther Burden, but if you told me like Girl Scout sauntering to the door, she's telling me my life and my house, my mortgage depends on it, and I just have to pick a Bears receiver not named DJ Moore that's going to score the most fantasy points, I would pick Rome.
Where do you fall with who gets kind of the slot role? Because this is the interesting part. Because on the one hand, the Lions were just 24th in 11 personnel rate last season. Yet we keep hearing everyone saying, oh, man, who's going to get that Amon-Ra St. Brown role? Spoiler, guys, and I know sometimes being out wide is still just you're the last guy on that side. You're still kind of more or less in the slot. Yeah. But based on PFF charting, Amon-Ra St. Brown played more snaps out wide than he did in the slot. Regardless of, again, where he was specifically on the field, he ran 92% route rate. Okay. He was out there in 2 wide receiver sets. They weren't taking him off the field. If Luther Burden is going to be a bit more restricted to the slot than we saw, I guess if he's going to be the primary slot receiver, do you think he's going to be taken off the field more? Because again, low rate of 11 personnel. And I would think based on the top 10 pick to Loveland, based on all the money thrown to Cole Kmet, I can see the Chicago Bears running a lot more 12 personnel than even the Lions have been doing over the past few years.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest risk to Luther Burden is if he is just stuck on a slot role. They do have the personnel. I think what you're going to get is a matchup-based approach from Ben Johnson, and then game script will eventually take over, and that could push him one way or another. But I think what you're going to see is there are going to be teams where they think the best way to attack them is with using more 12 personnel because they've got 2 quality tight ends. Then I think you're going to see other teams where they're like, no, man, we want to get their nickel on the field, and we want to attack them with Luther Burden, or we want to move DJ Moore around, whatever the case may be. So I think it will come down to being a little bit maddening, which maybe makes him a better best ball pick, right, than what we're talking about in redraft. Now, an injury could occur And I could see Luther Burden immediately taking over a lot of the things that DJ Moore does, right? DJ Moore is actually one of the comps that came up in the supermodel for Luther Burden. So there is some contingent upside there with him. We just talked about Emeka Egbuka. I've drafted way more Emeka Egbuka than Luther Burden. So even though I'm sitting here saying, hey, at price, I like Luther Burden. I like the upside potential there for where you're getting him. I've got him clearly below Emeka Egbuka. I would much prefer to have him because of what you just talked about. I think there's a pretty open path to the Bucs just deciding, man, we're going to run 3 wide receivers 85% of the time. When you look at Ben Johnson's history and the fact that he's got the 2 tight ends, like you said, I think there is more risk for Luther Burden. And again, that's why I also did mention Rome Odunze being out there like pretty much all the time. I don't think he's going to leave the field. He could run the most routes on the team.
Yeah. And as much as I would love to, really get into DeAndre Swift now where he falls into all this, Dwayne, we could probably go ahead and move on.
I can't believe he didn't lead with that. Okay, fantasy football fans, sure, NFL season may be long over, but next season's action is already well underway. We're talking big trades, new signings, draft order shuffles, you name it. And all this preseason NFL action is easier to enjoy with the official beer of the NFL. So get Bud Light delivered today and enjoy every season projection, every player trade, every coaching change. Ian mentioned DeAndre Swift, every single episode, every draft pick with the clean, crisp taste of Bud Light, the official beer of the NFL. So stock up now for the offseason and enjoy Bud Light, easy to drink, easy to enjoy.
DK Metcalf, Dwayne, all of a sudden making top 5 money and seemingly will be catching passes from Aaron Rodgers this year. Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, next big target competition. It doesn't look like Arthur Smith's going to get his wish and get Jonnu Smith in there to mess everything up. So again, do you think there could be potential for a Stephon Diggs-esque leap on his new team? Of course, I'm referring to when Diggs went from, again, a pretty crowded Vikings offense to Buffalo. We had concerns about it, and they turned out to be pretty bad concerns because the man went on a great 4-year run.
Yeah, so the interesting part with DK Metcalf, one, we do need Aaron Rodgers, and I know some people are going to listen to that and go, man, Aaron Rodgers is washed. Yeah, but guys, he's better than what they're staring at right now. Like Mason Rudolph was like, he was fine, but you don't. I still think the ceiling, we would all agree, like if things clicked perfectly, like there's a better chance of it happening with Aaron Rodgers than it would be. And we saw Aaron Rodgers completely feed, as you mentioned earlier in the show, he just fed Davante Adams down the stretch last year, and that won people fantasy championships. So I think the door is open. So here's the thing when I look at DK Metcalf, Ian, over the last couple of years and really for most of his career, he's never shown that he can be this true alpha wide receiver 1. But there were 2 years where he got pretty close. If you look at him in 2022 and 2023, his adjusted, well, I don't have to adjust. He played all 17 games in those, 24 and 25% target shares. His targets per route run in those 2 years, 24 and 25%. Here's the problem. In all the other years of his career, his targets per route run, 18%, 20%, 21%, 20%. That 21 and 20 are over the last 2 years. Now, DK Metcalf has always been an absolute alpha against man coverage. When his quarterback sees he's getting man coverage, and it makes sense. Like when you look at the size of DK Metcalf and imagine one person trying to cover him, like if I were the quarterback, I would be just like, yeah, dude, it's coming to you. And that has happened. The challenge for him has been really what happens against zone coverage. And you and I both know 70% of the NFL's coverage is zone. That's not a true number, guys, because zone is switching to man based on concepts and different things. But still, we know it's mostly a zone coverage league. And that's been an area where we've really seen DK Metcalf struggle. And if you go back to those years where Metcalf was suddenly relevant, it was because they figured out how to get him the ball against zone. In those 2 years, Ian, 23% targets per route run against zone. All these other years, his man coverage stuff has been great, but it's been his targets per route run against zone, 18%, 16%, 19%, 14%. So I think what that comes down to is scheme, right? Ultimately, do we trust Arthur Smith to really dial things up in a way that are going to put DK Metcalf in a scenario where he can succeed and get more of these targets against zone, not just when he gets the man coverage looks? And I think there is a positive silver lining here They did that some with George Pickens whenever they didn't have Deontay Johnson on the field. Obviously, last year he was gone from the team. There were times when they did that with Pickens, and we saw them actually open up his route tree, go to back the way we opened the show. Mike Evans having his best yards per route run ever, and he had that lower ADOT. Why? Because he was running more of the route tree. And whenever you're running more of the route tree, that puts you more in line to, depending on, okay, it doesn't matter, is the team running zone or man, you get more targets. If you're just running the downfield stuff, basically the quarterback's reading the center of the field and saying, oh, you got man coverage, single coverage, I'm going to send it to you. But if you've got zone coverage hovering over the top plus a guy underneath, it's harder to get the ball to that player. So I think a lot of this comes down, and this is very sad because we never know how to trust this man, is Arthur Smith. I think DK's actually shown he can do this, but will Arthur Smith use him this way? To your point, I think maybe the simplest path to it is they don't have anyone else. I feel like they kind of have to use DK Metcalf this way. So my answer to your question is yes, I do think there's a scenario, again, assuming huge caveat, they get Aaron Rodgers, that there is this chance that like we could see, I don't know if it's a Stephon Diggs boom because that became like a top 6 wide receiver, but could DK squeeze into the bottom low end wide receiver 1 range? I do think that's in his range of outcomes.
150 million reasons why they should consider feeding him every target he can get, Dwain. That is now, again, the 5th highest mark on a per year basis. So Pickens last year, again, it was still a run first offense, but similar position as Metcalf where there wasn't really anywhere else to go with the ball. To Arthur Smith's credit, the 17 game pace for Pickens targets was 125. So the way I look at Metcalf is he's really been a boomer bust wide receiver 3 each of the last 4 seasons, finished between the wide receiver 22 and the wide receiver 31 in PPR points per game. Had the top 10 finish in 2020, seems like forever ago, but again, not really being forced to buy him all that much more expensive. He's going right now as a wide receiver 28 over at Underdog Fantasy. So again, a few guys in that range, George Pickens himself, Zay Flowers, Cortland Sutton. I don't think Metcalf necessarily sticks out as the guy I need to have every single time I get to that round 4, round 5 term. But at the same time, again, I do see the path to potentially a nice boom year. But as Dwain said, definitely need a Aaron to be there with all due respect to Mason Rudolph. So honestly, guys, again, DK Metcalf feeling okay about it, but some of those guys I just mentioned, Cortland Sutton, Calvin Ridley's over there, Chris Olave, a lot of big questions. And I think accordingly, it is time for an ADP audit presented by Premier National Sports. Number 1 wide receivers in their offenses, yet priced as wide receiver 3s in fantasy. Dwain, I feel like one of these guys we're going to look back on in a few months and say, how did we not just pounce on that affordable price tag? So again, guys, time for an ADP audit. Shout out Premier National Sports for the idea. But yeah, man, personally, Calvin Ridley, someone I've been trying to draft all offseason long. I know we talked about him back in March, and my reasoning is pretty simple. I just think he could actually go out there and get 150 plus targets. If I was in charge of fantasy life projections, I am not. Maybe there's a reason for that. He would be over 150 targets, but in the meantime, I just got to pester Dwain from time to time about ticking up that number. That said, Olave, Judy, Sutton, I can see similar arguments there. So again, Dwain, my chip would be on Calvin Ridley in this range. What say you?
Yeah, Calvin Ridley is the guy that I have been drafting the most in this range as well. Cortland Sutton, going a little bit earlier, and I worry with him. Like, we like Cortland Sutton, but he's never really shown to be this consistent year-over-year performer, right? Yards per route run still weren't great last year. He did get some targets. Now, the last 2 years, the thing that Cortland Sutton has done is score some touchdowns, Ian. He does get a lot of end zone targets, gets a lot of targets in the red zone, so I think that's a pretty big positive for him. But I just like the idea of Cam Ward coming here to Tennessee. I look at Calvin Ridley versus the rest of this team. I mean, we've got Tyler Lockett, who's just really a shell of his former self. And then we've got some late round picks with Alec Manor, as well as Chimere Dyke, I believe, out of Florida. So it's not like
Van Jefferson's there. Come on, guys.
What we got doing? Van Jefferson. So yeah, I feel like it's pretty wide open for this to be, that opportunity for Calvin Ridley to dominate. And I just feel better because it's like Cam Ward, they're going to stick with him. Like, I'm hoping that he's good. Like, when we talk about Cleveland, talking about Jerry Jeudy, like, how long does Joe Flacco get to start? And then, like, we could be in real trouble if it's like Dylan Gabriel. I will say with Sutton, at least we know we've got Bo Nix. So I get why the market's the highest on Sutton, but I do think that you've identified the sweet spot here. And it is Calvin Ridley is the one that I want to target the most based on where they're going in ADP.
And again, I do just think it's really the quarterback differences, at least when we are looking at Jerry Jeudy and Chris Olave relative to Ridley, can certainly wrap our mind around Cam Ward being really freaking good at football relative to some of those other quarterbacks.
Are you drafting Olave at all? Like, I love Olave, but I mean, the Shuck thing has me kind of petrified, to be honest. Like, it's such a long shot that Shuck's going to be good. I hate to say it, and I'm a Saints fan, man. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's just we're just going by the data. The guy played college football for 27 years. Like, and he never was really great. Now there were some injuries and things there. He was like, okay. The film people like Shuck. And so I get it. There's this chance he's going to be good. But, man, like, it's pretty scary, and I love Olave.
To be fair, Olave and Jeudy are slightly discounted compared to Sutton and Ridley, so they aren't, exactly right next to each other. But I will say this. I've gone after Olave in some of these builds where I found myself taking an elite quarterback or an elite tight end or multiple running backs in the first few rounds because, again, that drop-off, once you kind of get to wide receiver 50, you have to start rolling the dice on guys like Emeka Egbuka and Luther Burden who, again, have the path to upside and everything. But now we're talking about, talented number 3 or number 4 pass game options. You're not getting legit number 1 wide receivers anymore. So I strive to almost always have at least 5 wide receivers inside the first 9 rounds. And I will say, man, when you're looking at Olave, I do think we've seen more in the underlying, advanced metrics department than the Ricky Pearsalls, than the Jaden Reeds, Khalil Shakurs of the world who are going in that price range. So I've still taken a decent amount of Olave. Would it be a lot cooler? I mean, I guess here's the thing, Dwayne. What if Olave, where would even be a reasonable trade destinations? But like, we believe in the talent here, okay? So if we have one just bright green flag, I understand there are some red flags, but one truly elite talent profile, we can get him at a legit wide receiver 4 price tag. So I have still been drafting him.
Yeah, dude, and it's the same thing as like, look, I know he's not on the same talent level as Malik Neighbors, and we're willing to take Malik Neighbors in round 1 with major quarterback questions. Right. I get it. They at least have Russell Wilson there as a stabilizer, and then they could go to Jackson Dart. And Shuck is definitely not the prospect that Jackson Dart was, but I mean, he went at the beginning of the second round. So yeah, I'm with you. Like the green flag is, and the one we care the most about is the talent. If you don't have the talent at receiver anyway, it's really hard to unlock anything else. Occasionally you can play slot and be underneath the coverage, and there's some little tricky things that can happen that can unlock a wide receiver into being more than what we would typically say their talent equals. For the most part, you got to be good first. And I think the other thing with Olave is he can attack all areas of the field. We've seen him do that. The guy can get downfield, intermediate. He can work underneath. Man, knock on wood. I hope there's no issues with the concussions this year for Olave. And man, I'm with you. I would be down for a trade. If Chris Olave suddenly was traded to a team with a quarterback, we're talking about a guy that could easily, depending on where he landed, move into like the top 18 wide receivers in our rankings.
Unfortunately, the 2 teams that popped in my head first were the Jets and the Steelers, and I don't think we would be overly thrilled about either of those coming to fruition. But again, we love the talent, and if you or someone else happens to be a pretty talented high school individual, really do invite you guys to go ahead and check out the fine folks over at Premier National Sports, because in today's age with NIL going on and all the other circus acts that you got to go through to get that D1 scholarship or play at any level of collegiate athletics, again, so much unknown, so much new, and you don't want to be left behind. That's why the fine folks again over at Premier National Sports are here to be a trusted recruiting and NIL resource for high school athletes and their families. So again, guys, help rising high school athletes take their game to the next level with personalized recruiting strategies and NIL education only at Premier National Sports. All right, Dwayne, Stefon Diggs making headlines for all the wrong reasons recently, certainly getting his party on over Memorial Day weekend. However, he did report to OTAs. He was actually looking pretty good recovering from that ACL injury. And we even got word from Ian Rappaport that no, the Patriots are not planning on releasing him, even though one, I'm not going to say idiotic, but someone else might say idiotic, beat reporter suggested could be the case. So again, wide open passing game. We like Kyle Williams, but man, speaking of someone like Chris Olave, I mean, Stefon Diggs, a little bit longer in the tooth, I get that, but if you just want to really take the target projections, look at the wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 landscape and say who could actually be their team's number 1 pass game option, Stefon Diggs stands out. So are you buying a veteran right now as Drake May's wide receiver 1?
Yeah, I think, and mainly because the price is right. I mean, we're talking about a guy that you can get much later in drafts. You don't have to spend, like a mid-round pick even on him. Like where's he at right now in Underdog? I believe you can get him somewhere between like around 7 and 8, Ian.
Wide receiver,
Stephon
45,
Diggs,
yeah.
Yeah, so he's pushed down in price, and guys, he's going to be cheaper than that on ESPN, on Yahoo. You guys can check out the ADP tool over at fantasylife.com. But when I look at Stephon Diggs, like, going to be 31.8, so almost 32 years old when this season starts. He's coming off of an injury, not ideal. We also did get the report that kind of got buried because of, like the pink stuff like that he had on the boat. But there was also a report that Stephon Diggs might not play the first 4 games of the season, right? And so I know it's not like saying, hey, that's guaranteed to happen. I did take one more game away from his projection, so now I've got him missing 3 games. I had started off at 4, I had moved it up to 2, and now I'm kind of back to between those 2. So I took one more game away, aging player, coming back from an injury, probably just smart to kind of do that anyway. If we think about, like what his profile looks like over a full season. Not the player he once was, but still, like yards per route run of last year of 1.84. That's still in that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 range. You look at his targets per route run, fell off from 27% to 23%. But also, when you're playing with Nico Collins, things happen. So Nico Collins is an absolute beast. Now, I know some of these games were without Nico Collins, so that also did help out Stephon Diggs a little bit. So when I look at it, it comes down to the price. I feel okay about it. Like, is he a player like I'm attacking whenever I've already drafted a bunch of wide receivers before him? No. But if it's a build where, hey, I need my wide receiver 4 and I feel pretty good about some other things that I've done, then I think that's a perfect time where Stephon Diggs makes sense. I do have more Kyle Williams, to be fair, and he does go later, but I want to be really clear. Like the hit rate on prospects in Kyle Williams' range is 36% over their first 3 seasons, turning into a top 36 wide receiver. So 1 out of 3 times, a prospect like Kyle Williams, as much as we love him, turns in a wide receiver 36 or better finish within his first 3 years. So on one hand, like when you compare that to other prospects, like this is what happens at wide receivers, like it's better than other names, but you just have to realize that that's a scenario that most of the time doesn't work out. And we saw it last year with Jalen Polk. We did the same thing. Yeah. Like he's a perfect example of, okay, wide receiver went in the second round. Patriots don't really have anybody to throw the ball to. We're going to go with Jalen Polk. Didn't work out. And I'm not saying Kyle Williams isn't a slightly better prospect than Jalen Polk, because I do think that like there's some truth to that. But at the same time, folks have got to realize that like this is a wide open room, and a veteran like Stephon Diggs could do damage. Hunter Henry would be really Hunter Henry like his primary target competition outside of Kyle Williams right now.
Isn't it pretty pathetic, though, speaking of Hunter Henry, that this dude led the entire Patriots team in targets last year and finished, like tight end 18, tight end 20? Why are people still drafting Hunter Henry in the year 2025? What ceiling are we actually chasing here?
Well, I think it comes down to some of the touchdown stuff. Like on Hunter Henry last year, like from a targets per route run stuff, what he did against man coverage, like was really he had like one of his better years. I think the bet is on Drake May taking a step forward. If Drake May actually gets better and the passing offense gets better, then Hunter Henry basically stays at the same level of involvement that he was last year, it's going to make him a borderline low-end tight end 1. Like it's going to put him right there in that conversation. Is it going to turn him into the tight end 4? No. But I think he does have a chance to finish as a low-end tight end 1. It really does come down to like how far can Drake May push the offense? If Drake May comes out and throws for 3,400 yards, it's going to be hard for Hunter Henry to really give us anything we're excited about. But if Drake May suddenly throws for 4,200 yards, Hunter Henry's probably coming along for the ride.
Obviously, a lot of question marks in New England, both with the pecking order and, to Dwain's point, what exactly the ceiling is. However, we do have these other passing games, the Bills, the 49ers, the Packers even, where, yeah, we are expecting them to still field good, maybe even great passing attacks. However, they actually don't have any wide receivers priced inside the top 36 because it really isn't a clear-cut number 1 wide receiver for any of these 3 organizations. It would be Brandon Ayuk for the 49ers, but he's also coming back from that ACL, MCL injury. So, Dwain, out of these 3 offenses, again, Bills, 49ers, Packers, you need a wide receiver. Essentially, everyone is available. Who are you taking?
Yeah, so with the Bills, it is Khalil Shakir. I've seen a lot of arguments for Keon Coleman, so I probably should mix him a little bit more. I think you've been taking him more. Not a super high target rate, but he was working downfield. He gets some of the looks in the end zone, so there's a lot of potential paths there, right? For
Got
Keon
that dog
Coleman
in him.
Like take a step forward. Got that dog in him. You know, he's pretty funny. You know, he's like a guy that you like to follow on social media. With the 49ers, I think it's Juwan Jennings. It could be Ricky Pearsall, but he's dealing with an injury right now. I do think, George Kittle is the dude, but we're talking wide receivers right now. So Juwan Jennings, so interesting though, Ian, because like I was doing some research over guys that have late breakouts, and he's now like the ultimate late breakout. Like Juwan Jennings went from being a guy that most of our underlying number one, his fantasy points said he's a wide receiver like 6. Then his underlying data matched that. It also said maybe if you squint, he could be a wide receiver 5. And then last year literally transforms before our eyes into really a wide receiver 2 type profile, wide receiver 3 some weeks. This dude was absolutely balling out. So the question is, do you want to buy into a 1-year sample of a late breakout, or do you want to bet on the late first-round pick and Ricky Pearsall? And my thought was Juwan Jennings hit the intensity of his breakout was so strong. It wasn't like he just barely scraped by. Like this dude was putting up 30% target share weeks. Like he had weeks where he was dominating the offense when Kittle and other people were available. So I lean Juwan Jennings on that team. Obviously Brandon Ayuk is the other guy I love to draft like you, but he might be missing. He could be missing half the year. We don't know for sure. We need more information on Brandon Ayuk. On the Packers, it's real simple. I'm going for Matthew Golden. I know he's a guy the supermodel didn't like as much as the NFL draft capital said, but still, when I look at the Packers, I'm like, we know what Romeo Doubs is. Fine. We probably know what Jaden Reed is at this point, and especially if they're going to keep him in a limited role, like that's a challenge. So I look at Golden as being the guy that, like, if suddenly he could do things different that none of these other guys on the team could do, and none of them at this point are really proven to be like a barrier to him getting targets. The only barrier that I see anytime I post anything about Matthew Golden is everybody's like, oh man, he's just going to run 80% of the routes. And that could happen. That would hurt him. But should we assume that? Like they spent a first round pick on him. They're kind of saying I know we've been saying all along that we're fine with not having a true wide receiver 1, but when they just drafted him in round 1, they actually just said the opposite. They kind of said, maybe we do need a wide receiver 1. So I'm putting the bet on Matthew Golden very clearly on the Packers, and he goes quite a bit later than the other first round NFL draft picks as far as where his ADP is right now.
I'm with you. You've been taking a lot of Golden. I will mix in some Jaden Reed because I still do think he's a very good football player. They manufacture enough touches to him where, again, we'll be a lot cooler if we got that route rate up. But still, put up, again, a great first half last year. Just, again, couldn't quite sustain it. With the 49ers, I'm betting on Ayuk depending on, again, the build. If I'm in a situation where I've already taken 5 wide receivers and I want to just add that cherry on top, it can maybe peak for me mid-season towards the end. Ayuk makes sense. But you said it with the Bills. I have been a Keon Coleman stan so far. And I'm not expecting him to turn into Josh Allen's new Stephon Diggs or anything. But I think he can be basically what we hoped Gabe Davis could be. And even Gabe Davis, man, you look at it, wide receiver 37, then wide receiver 51 during the 2022-2023 seasons. We can buy Keon Coleman as the wide receiver 56 out there right now. So again, Gabe was someone who was getting streamed up in like the top 24 discussion. I think that could be, Keon's ceiling. Well, my bold prediction for the Bills was that, we see Keon go out there, 800 plus yards, double-digit touchdowns, sneaks into potentially that wide receiver 2 borderline production. Love him in best ball, which we can say about any wide receiver I get. But again, that big playability led all wide receivers in Buffalo in red zone targets last year. Josh trusts him. I trust him.
Yeah, it is true, though. I like some of these guys more in best ball because I don't have to predict the weeks. That doesn't mean that one of them couldn't break out early in the year and then all of a sudden we love them in redraft. We're like, oh, man, I can play Keon Coleman every week. That's how this stuff goes. It looks like it's a best ball pick until it's not. And the way that it's not is if Keon Coleman breaks out. Then we'll love him. My big challenge with the Keon stuff is I'm seeing so many people push him as this big breakout candidate. I don't think his underlying data points really point to that. I'm saying it's in the range of outcomes, and I definitely want Keon Coleman exposure. But man, like they started off the year letting him be the primary dude, but gave him all the routes, right? And he basically lost that job. That job went away, never truly earned it back. And if we look at him, down the stretch, weeks 15 through the playoffs, I mean, we're talking about a guy with a 15% target share. Like, so he just wasn't really able to do much, and they never gave him that full-time role back.
His wrist.
Do what?
His wrist hurt.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, I know between him and Tyreek Hill and this wrist stuff, but I do agree. Like, he's playing through some injuries, but he did end up, like you mentioned, the thing that made the most sense to me is it's the Gabe Davis role. The average depth of target for Keon over that stretch after things kind of changed for him was 18.5. Which is astronomical. Like, that's literally, you're out there running go routes. Maybe not the best thing, though, in today's NFL with the way defenses are playing. So, again, I'm a little less bullish on the Keon breakout than what I'm seeing from some folks in the industry. But at the same time, I do realize he was a guy they liked last year. They drafted him. He plays on an offense that we like, and he could certainly take a step forward in year 2.
Those things, plus, again, do love the contested catch, jump ball ability, and honestly, the yards after the catch stuff. I know Matt Waldman was on that even before he got to Buffalo, just back at his Florida State days. Really, it was impressive as well. So, good stuff, Mr. Dwain, again, as we break down all these wide receivers. Next week, coming back with tight ends. In the meantime, make sure you guys check out Kendall Valenzuela, Cooter Doodle, and the rest of the Fantasy Life crew. So, for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.